Rotary Club, you may already know. Joining me in the studio today is Dr. Abdulrahman Funsho, a distinguished consultant cardiologist who currently serves as the chairman of the Nigerian National Polioplus Committee of the Rotary International. And today we will be taking a look at what has happened since 2014 when the transmission of polio, that virus that causes children to become paralytic, if you permit me to put it that way. What has happened since 2014 when transmission was terminated? Are we making gains, as it were, or what is actually going on? I welcome you to the program, Dr. Abdulrahman Funsho.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Rotary Club and polio, I'm very much aware, and then the viewers are aware that there are a couple of conditions that have been plaguing not just Nigeria, the sub-Saharan region of Africa and the world, as it were, because Rotary Club is international. Why polio in terms of emphasis?
Well, a friend of mine always answers, with another question: why not polio?
Exactly.
But basically, it's because at the time we started, this program in 1987, it was obvious to us that the disease burden of polio, which I must emphasize is very preventable in a very simple form, was too high, for us to continue to accept. I mean, at that time we were having about 350,000 cases of polio every year, spread around 125 countries of the world. And we know that all that is required is for us to get a very simple vaccine to every child below the age of 5, and it will be one of these, in fact, the second disease ever in history to be eradicated, just by this simple, process of getting vaccine to reach every child below the age of 5. Mm-hmm. Therefore, we thought it was something that we can do, and in partnership with WHO at that time, which eventually got us the World Health Assembly in 1987 to now accept and start the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, that we can, eradicate polio. At that time, we were looking, as a matter of fact, at 2005. Mm. But of course, we've learned, since then that it's not, that easy. The virus, has a lot of tricks, up its sleeves, and we needed to get all countries involved, on board to make sure that this works out. So that is why we decided that we need to take on polio, because if we eradicate polio, that will be the second disease in history to have been eradicated, particularly through simple process of immunization. Unlike smallpox, a lot of us still carry big scars, on our arms. That was scarification, and you bled and stuff like that.
Well, I'm old enough to experience
that's just a simple drop, in a child's mouth on 3 different occasions, and most of the time the child gets immunized against polio.
Oh, so if polio is eradicated, that crazy disease that is quite devastating to a lot of families, especially as it has to do with their children, will be the second disease in history to have been eradicated. Now, it makes a lot of sense to see why Rotary Club has taken on polio. Now, in 2014, we got the medical officer of health at Tiosa local government to come here to discuss about the break-in transmission. We were able to get hindsight of what was going on at the grassroots level in terms of the immunization processes and what the government was doing. But you are the chairman of the National Committee for Polio from the Rotary Club International. What has happened so far since 2014? Sir?
Well, since 2014, certification, or the listing from polio endemic countries came last year in September from WHO. Okay. And from the time we had the last case of polio, which was in July 24th, 2014, okay, we need 3 years of no polio case in the country, which takes us to July next year. If after July next year, if up to July next year we see no more cases of polio in Nigeria, after doing all their technical things, WHO can now certify Nigeria to be a polio-free country. And that would be a new ball game entirely. But getting there is not an easy task. You see, when people visibly see the destruction of the virus, they tend to want to get up and do something. But when they don't see much of the disease around, it's a lot of hard work convincing people of the need to continue immunizing their children. So Rotary International and its partner agencies, essentially the government, of the country, because as they say, you cannot shave a man's head in his absence. The government needed to be really involved, and we are thankful to the government of Nigeria that they've been on board, both morally and financially, to ensure that we get to the finishing line of next year. WHO, UNICEF, the Center for Disease Control, which is a American government agency based in Atlanta, and in recent times a lot of support, both technical and financial, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has ensured that we continue monitoring, because it's very important. If you say there's no case of polio around, you need to have very robust surveillance system.
Okay, well, Dr. Abdulrahman, before we come to that, it is important. I know the viewers, especially some people who read broadly, are wondering. I'm aware that out of 100 and something countries, polio was only left in Nigeria, Afghanistan, and one other country.
Pakistan.
Now, before Pakistan. So before we get to what the virus is at all, the different variants and the vaccines as it has to do with that, what went wrong in Nigeria?
Well, we had a long delay because at some point in time there was a misconception about the safety of the vaccine itself in some parts of some states in the northern Nigeria. It became a very huge national issue, and the government, needed to rise to the occasion, and through the political leadership, traditional leadership, and religious leadership, were able to disabuse people's minds and make them appreciate the safety of this vaccine is for the good of their children. And there's nothing un-Islamic about giving vaccines. We got fatwas from major religious leaders, particularly in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, to make that reassurance. I mean, Saudi Arabia has been polio-free, for many, many years. Muslim countries, like Malaysia, also use the same vaccines to become polio-free. So all the theories, that were propounded against the vaccine were disabused. And the leadership in the North, both political, traditional, and religious, are now fully backing the use of the vaccine.
Okay, so there was a myth.
There was a misconception.
Okay, better to put it that way.
Yes, about the safety of the vaccine, which was eventually dispelled. And I'm glad to say that that coming on board of particularly traditional religious leaders has helped now to turn the tide. Because if people don't accept the vaccines, you're going nowhere with polio eradication.
I tell you, that's good news indeed. But now, you are a consultant physician, and I don't think there'll be any better person to talk about this than you. I know that the physicians cover everything broadly before they now specialize, but thank God you've done a lot in terms of public health. What about polio? What is it about this virus itself, and what are the different variants, and where does the vaccine come in?
See, the polio virus has been around for thousands of years. So it's not a new disease. And we know that polio will be found anywhere there's poor sanitation.
Poor sanitation.
Because it is spread through contaminated food and water. Therefore, it's a disease you find in environments where sanitation is poor. And you can imagine what kind of environment we're talking about. Poor countries, poor neighborhoods. So the virus will find its way into an unimmunized child through these two contaminated sources, water, or food. And there are three types of this virus. We have the type 1, type 2, and type 3.
Okay.
That is what has made it a little bit difficult to even eradicate, because you must produce vaccines that contain these 3 vaccines, either individually or in mixtures. So the type 1...
that contain the antibodies, you mean?
That contains actually the 2 types of vaccines that have been in use. One, which is the oral vaccine, actually contains live vaccines that have been, their strengths have been reduced so that they can provoke the body
the antibody
to produce
response.
antibodies response.
Okay.
Then we have, the killed salt vaccine, which was actually the first vaccine to be discovered in the mid-50s, which actually is injectable. But it's to do campaigns that we've done for polio, you must look for a vaccine that is easily delivered to a child.
Of course.
By non-professional people. So the choice has to be the oral polio vaccine.
Oh, so that's why the oral.
So that is why it has
popular.
been the vaccine of choice to do mass immunizations all over the world.
Okay, viewers and friends out there, I'm sure, I hope you're not getting confused. We've been talking about antigens, vaccines, antibodies, and reactions, talking about the polio virus. Well, just to simplify it, you must have seen families, if you haven't experienced it in your own family, where all of a sudden a child gets very weak in the leg, next thing they are not able to walk, and then not just the legs, sometimes children have even passed on from respiratory muscle paralysis, as it were. More times than often, that is a symptom of poliomyelitis caused by polio virus. And Dr. Abdulrahman Funsho has been telling us some of the things that have been going on. Now, Dr. Abdulrahman, turning points, removal of Nigeria from the endemic list. I'm aware that happened sometime this year. But what are the challenges moving forward?
Yeah, coming from Dr. Funsho, rather than Dr. Abdulrahman.
Okay.
The challenges now, first and foremost, in my view, is complacency. As I was mentioning earlier, the fact that we've not seen the disease for about 21 months now may make people start to relax and think that, the work is done. So we need to continue reminding people that the work is not done. It is only with that realization that we can do all the other things that are necessary. Continuing to create public awareness of the need for mothers and caregivers to take their children to health centers to have routine immunization for polio. And of course, other diseases. That's why we call our program Polioplus.
Okay.
Polio plus other. That is the first thing. The second thing is advocacy to government at every level, the federal government, the state government, and local government leadership, to continue to make provisions for resources, both human and material resources, to ensure that immunization campaigns are carried on and that health centers are stocked with appropriate vaccines, so that when mothers take their children there, they're able to get them immunized. And also to engage the media, and I'm glad that we are doing this program today, so that they can continue to inform families of the need for them to make sure that their wards under the age of 5 continuously are covered until such a time that the government will say, now you don't need to vaccinate your child. And that will not happen until no part of the world, including the last 2 countries of Pakistan and Afghanistan, do not have any more cases of polio and are certified polio-free.
Well, indeed, yes. But very much importantly, viewers and friends out there, not just the government, like you have said, we have to improve on our sanitation, because you have said this is a disease that can be transmitted via contaminated food or water. And anywhere there's poor sanitation, polio would want to tend to thrive. Now, viewers and friends out there, you must try to make sure that you keep your environment clean. Not just polio, there are wide range of diseases that are associated with poor sanitation. But again, Dr. Funsho here is telling us that mothers and caregivers must take their children to the nearest health centers to be immunized. Quickly, Dr. Funsho, is the immunization free?
Yes.
Okay.
Immunization is,
the viewers out there,
immunization is provided free at every level.
Okay. Having ascertained that, tell us about recent innovations in terms of the fight, just for recent innovations that are on ground to make sure that this poliomyelitis does not come back to countries that eradication has occurred? And what is Rotary Club doing at the moment?
Well, part of the innovations, particularly in those areas that we've had polio in recent years,
Yes.
Is to ensure that we secure our borders as far as transmission of diseases are concerned. So we have what we call permanent health teams at our borders with our neighboring countries, Cameroon, Chad, and the Niger Republic.
Okay.
So that children going in or out, once they're below the age of 5, whether they have evidence of immunization before or not, we have teams that are stationed there permanently that make sure that these children get poliovirus. Because it's one thing.
Get the polio vaccine.
Vaccine in the form of the oral, vaccine. So that is an innovation.
So as they're coming in, they are vaccinated.
They are vaccinated to make sure that even if there's polio on the other side of the border, the child doesn't come in and infect children here. And of course, when children are going out, just to be sure that even they coming from here have not been missed in previous immunization exercises, they too are immunized before they go out.
Oh, that's wonderful.
The other thing is that we have a system where in the security compromised areas, as you know, some parts of this country were unreachable. You couldn't go there because of insurgency.
Yes.
We have teams that are standing by such that when the security agencies tell us that that area is safe for 1-2 days because they're going to secure it, then under armed escort, these teams will go into these areas, search our children under the age of 5, immunize them, and come back to base again.
Oh, wow.
And gradually we're getting to a point where every child in this country is being reached. We still have children we're missing, either because when we go out to immunize, they're not at home, or they're hidden by their parents who still have this misconception about polio. Or because of lack of understanding of the need to take their children to health centers. Because we don't go house to house all the time. This year we've had 2 national immunization days across the country in March and in April, where Rotarians and partners and health workers went house to house to identify children below the age of 5 and give them the oral polio vaccine. It is important that a child has at least 3 vaccines.
Of course.
But they can have up to 100.
Oh, I see.
Because the vaccine is innocuous, it is generally safe. So there's no danger. It's better to give too much than to give too little.
And come down with the conditions.
Yes,
anyway, Dr. Funsho, because of time, a couple of us are friends to the Rotary Club International, and we've been hearing some vocabulary, if you permit me to put it that way. And I know that some of the viewers out there will love to know, what is it about the concept of the switch? And whilst you're talking about that, you can throw something in on the immunization gap.
Well, the switch actually is a technical term that we use in our efforts to eradicate polio.
Okay.
Or switching from one kind of vaccine to the other.
Oh, I see.
Because we have not had any case of the type 2 polio virus in more than a decade, we thought it is time to remove the vaccine itself from circulation. Because up till now, we're using 3 types of vaccines, either individually or in different combinations.
Okay.
We have, monovalent vaccines which can contain type 1, type 2, or type 3. We have bivalent, can contain 2, of the vaccine, or trivalent, which can contain the 3. Now, the 3 that contains the type 2, we needed to remove from circulation.
Okay.
Because it has not caused any disease in any child for more than a decade. And there's a risk that the vaccine itself can cause paralysis in a child, which we call vaccine-derived. So the Global Polio Eradication Initiative decided now it is time to remove that virus, because as I mentioned earlier, it is still a live virus, though its power has been reduced in the vaccine, so that we're now left with just the type 1 and type 3. Even type 3 we have not seen for about 3 years now.
Okay.
So the idea is that gradually we remove any vaccines that contain live virus, no matter how attenuated that live virus is. Such that when we are getting to the end game, which is when we see no more case of polio, the only vaccine that will be in circulation will be kill vaccine, which is the injectable type.
Okay.
And currently we are using both. We are using both the oral polio vaccine and injectable vaccines all across the country. One, to boost immunity in those areas where immunity of children is still low.
Okay.
And secondly, to start the gradual transition from live virus use to dead virus use, because once we get to the point of polio eradication, we need to remove any live virus from circulation. And the only vaccine that doesn't have a live virus
is the injectable. So what is it about the immunization gap and all of this effort?
The immunization gap is, again, part of what I mentioned earlier, creeping up on us because of complacency.
Okay.
The South has not seen any case of polio, some areas 7 years. Like Lagos, almost 7 years now, they have no case of polio. Therefore, the infrastructure for routine immunization is not as strong as we expect it to be. So we are now having situations where when we say a gap, we're talking about the gap, shortfalls in the number of children who should be immunized. We expect to cover 100% of our children. But if we get about 85, 90%, we know that the other 10%, will be safe. So the gap is that gap in the level of immunity we expect to ensure that polio never comes back here again, and the level of immunity we have. And that is spread across the country, amazingly. You have, states in this country in northeast, northwest, north central, southeast, south-south, and southeast that still have coverage of less than 50%.
Oh, wow.
Which is not really acceptable, and it's dangerous. So we're trying to focus on those areas by having special interventions of going house to house in specifically identify local government areas. So we have local government immunization days in those areas, which we did about 2 weeks ago, to make sure that we bridge that gap and make sure we move those areas to having children who have coverage of 80% and above.
Very importantly, I mean, indeed, 110% of the children should be covered, if that is possible. And mothers and caregivers out there, you have a very large role to play when it comes to this regard. Ensure to take your children out. Now, quickly, just to round off, Dr. Funsho, I know that the Rotary Club is a self-sustaining club in terms of funding. You have partners, but how have the resources been applied, and where did they come from?
Well, it's important to mention resources because we still continue to need funds. Rotary on its own has expended about $1.8 billion on this effort since it started. But the program as a whole has consumed getting to about $8 billion now. Most of those additional sums come from governments around the world, major philanthropies like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the governments in country, like in the case of Nigeria, the Nigerian government. But we still have a gap. I mean, we're looking at up till the year 2018, we're seeing a gap of funds that will be required to get that far of $1.5 billion.
Okay.
So we need to continue advocating to our government and also other governments of the world that have been assisting in ensuring that this disease is eradicated globally, not only in Nigeria, such that when we need funds for all the activities that are planned to get us to that finishing line, we are not found wanting, and we are not thrown back several years.
Indeed, funding is very important. Well, Dr. Funsho, our time is far spent, but just in less than a minute, could you say something about savings from eradication? What do we stand to benefit? And what do you have for the viewers out there? Yes, just in less than a minute.
Generally, I've seen, this question put out, and the first thing people say, we'll save so many billions, of dollars. Yes, we will. We'll save, about $50 billion by the year 2030.
Oh,
if we're able to eradicate
as much as 50 billion. Imagine that getting back into the economy of the world.
But then, we'll save a lot of lives of children.
Most important,
which is the most important thing. And if we can save the life of one child or ensure that one child is not maimed by the virus, then that's a huge saving.
Oh, that is huge, because every one child that is affected is usually one too many. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Abdulrahman Funsho, for coming on the program to throw light on issues that have seemingly been not very clear to lots of Nigerians out there. I want to, on behalf of the NTA to Lagos Network Center, thank the Rotary Club for all you have been doing, not just in the area of polio, but in the area of your work to humanity. Viewers and friends out there, that will be a wrap for this episode of the program. Ensure to join us same time next week. But until then, always remain blessed. Thank you.
This is the network service of the NTA.
Hello and welcome. It's official and authentic. Petrol, also known as PMS, is now to sell for not more than 145 naira per litre. Gas gets an ample boost in infrastructural development and motivation for domestic use. Impacts of these should shape up socio-economic development. That's the trend of thought in our package for this week, including recent efforts of celebrating engagements to enrich and harness the body of knowledge available in the industry, and especially in the NNPC, courtesy of the Knowledge Cafe. My name is Akin Agbijule. This is Oil and Gas Forum.
Want to do business in the upstream sector of the Nigerian oil and gas industry? you need to register with Nigeria Petroleum Exchange (NIPEX). NIPEX is an electronic platform that facilitates contracting process in the oil and gas industry. We increase visibility of supplier for business opportunities as well as instill integrity into the contracting process. On how to register, simply log on to NIPEX website www.nipexng.com